Hi everyone. So today I'm making the video about Ayesha's in-depth analysis in a non-glorifying, non-praising way. I just want to look at the facts and just have a good deep psychological analysis, and let's look at it, objectively without fear, without having to cover it up, without having to over-explain or, PR it in a way that is more digestible, more palatable to Muslims. Let's look at her personality. Let's look at her overall personality arch, her character development, from this historical, significant idea of religion. As you all know, Aisha is the daughter of the first fanatic of Islam, Abu Bakr, or his name was Abdullah. He is now one of your closest companions. You can almost say like he is your, a ride or die kind of friend to Muhammad here. Friend, like his brother, his ride or die companion, really. So when we hear that, there's all these disputes about her age and her date of birth, we're just going to go with the narrative and then we'll dissect it a little more going into the video. She's born here to this fanatic who has also, as you know, multiple wives. We know polygamy is a thing here. And it's interesting to know that he did have a different wife who he has, Asma, the older daughter, who apparently by some, stories go, she could have been 10 years older than her sister Aisha. And this wife, he actually, divorced because when he accepted Islam, she didn't, for whatever reason, irreconcilable differences. That's a pretty big one. So, that marriage didn't last. This child. And this child is growing up in this environment where she sees her mom, her dad always, very much deeply into this belief, very much deeply entrenched going further. It's dividing families, essentially. Not everyone's agreeing to this cult idea or this religious idea. And before it solidified into a religion kind of division, it was more of like who's with me and who's against him. Like they needed support. So they always had like the idea of supporters. And in that sense, there were a lot of supporters, but not a lot of them were believers. They didn't actually believe his Muhammad's mission or his idea of prophethood. They didn't accept his claim of having divine contact with any god or his whatever his claims were he was trying to make at that time. They didn't believe him, but they did somehow were, for tribal reasons, for whatever reasons, they still had that idea of like, okay, we have to support one another. And that's much stronger actually, the tribal support. So one of the things that is interesting in their situation is there's a lot of emphasis on lineage, right? And whose son and what social class was also determined a lot by lineage and by your clan and by your tribe. That was kind of their way of what you would have equivalent to the social status in today's time. And one of the things that we find interesting is that Aisha is very much aware and very much fond and very much interested in keeping her social status in that sense of her lineage. In her following narrations, you'll see that she overly identifies with this idea because she also saw and claims, does end up claiming in other places that she was actually born in this Islam. Post-Islam, you have seen that they gained social status by how close they were to this man and how they were always like born Muslims, right? So she does claim that Abu Bakr and Muhammad were basically like brothers and they were very close. So they also essentially saw each other's children as niece and nephews. And that is exactly what happens when Muhammad sends for this proposal or suggests this proposal to marry this child. The extreme reluctance, or you could say, which was somewhat of a little bit of a disturbing fact, was that this is his best friend. He thought that he was also in a way his brother. And he said, like, isn't essentially she your niece? And we see how apologists will cover that up by saying, like, look at how amazing Abu Bakr's faith and iman and concern for being right, and halal, basically, because he didn't want to do anything haram. But I would like to remind you that, the person he's actually cross-examining or questioning is the man himself. Like, who else is going to tell you really than him, right? Other than him. I don't know if he thought that he was going to say like, hold on, hang on, you're right. She is my niece. That would be inappropriate. But as you have it, Muhammad says, no, there's no niece, there's nothing. There's no, this level of respect or, sacredness or this type of any kind of idea of relationships. And eventually she is someone I can marry. which was, I think, in a way you could note is disturbing actually to Abu Bakr. He thought that was not something, required. Historians later do say that this was kind of a tactic because Muhammad really wanted to solidify, the fact that Abu Bakr thinks of him as his brother is not really the ultimate source here of brotherhood or like that. That is not that sacred. That is not that binding. But the fact of marriage was really the political ally. That's how you were more tied in. So that's how you would almost it's kind of an insecure way of buying loyalty or, support or lifelong sort of commitments. Now, let's get into the topic of age. The topic of age is very interesting because we have some conflicting sources about why, they might have even made it seem younger than she really was. Because they were like, even back in the day, they would marry young. At least they would marry, both of them would be young, the husband and the wife. They would start off early. But this huge, this extreme age gap was sort of unnecessary, and they kind of frowned upon it. Now that we have this one established idea that an older man can marry a child, and we have some pretty, dates here fixed, like 9, 10, age of 6 contract, 9, 10 is when you consummate. So it's pretty clear and sort of, it was undisputed for a long time, safely, tradition, in their sources. So it wasn't something that they really questioned too much. And I think it's fair because post that practice, it continued and it became a source of their following it in a way that this was a sunnah really now, because their original, their OG prophet or the OG Muslim man actually did it. So, they should be doing it. It's just fine, correct. There was no opposition here. And with the changing times, of course, and a major rise and extreme disturb, like with our growing sense of right and wrong, humanity and Muslims, even in the Arab world, chose to align with the modernization ideas and try to actually, distance or basically stop the practice of marrying child brides. Now, of course, this is very hard since there's the established narrative of our prophet doing it, and everything he does is really just an example to follow and emulate. So basically, this is like their sunnah, and they were both revered, and they think that was an amazing, heavenly, and the love story of the ages. Just realizing how disturbing and disgusting this whole practice was, they have decided to recalculate her age. Now, how they do that is basically using strategies of omission and commission, which is retracing the hadiths basically and sources of history and basically to blur it to what we could say is early adolescence. Like they can't still 100% say that she was an adult. So it's a child, but we can't say it was basically somewhere between 9 to 12 to 15. They're just kind of blurring it. And I think that my favorite is when, people like Gandhi or any other new scholars in modern times will be like, yeah, they just forgot to say the 10, the Ashar. It was 9 and Ashar. They just forgot to say the 10 and that dropped it, and very apologetically and beautifully telling you how they just forgot. But I think that just pokes a bigger hole in your whole chain of narrations, because you're now saying that there are things that were forgotten, which doesn't look too good, for Islam basically, and hadith and everything. Moving to her personality and moving on from this whole, discussion of age and how old she was, whatever the reason was. Some of the reasons are very interesting, which I will also come to later in the video. Now we have this child who, growing up, has seen her father, mother absolutely all in, putting their money, putting their energy, putting everything, their child basically, into this whole idea of Islam, Muhammad, and this new idea of growing this religion. Now that they're in Medina, she has essentially grown up seeing this man coming to her house every day, twice a day. He's just there all the time. So we can say that it was not a total stranger kind of idea, but she sees how completely influential and important this man or this figure is for her parents. Now, when she comes into this idea of marriage, we have this whole story about how she even brought her dolls. She was a child, she was playing and taken off, washed up, and presented. There are even some more disturbing narrations of how prior to this situation, she was actually tried to fed and, kind of fatten up or force her to sort of, get ready for this next situation that's happening in this next chapter in her life, which is quite disturbing, and nobody wants to hear that. I don't think any children want to hear that in a stories book, or that's not the kind of stuff you want to tell your children, how terribly disgusting, and they were fattening up this little girl because now she is essentially married to this 50-year-old man. What is interesting is how Ayesha herself looks at the situation. She is now, remember, a product of this environment, a cult, steeped in this fanatic culture. And she recalls these things, but she's also telling it in a way which somehow makes her look good, which is, it's clear that she didn't even see this as any form of abuse or wrong or questionable or anything bad that happened. She recalls this in a very interesting, in a way that makes her even in a fond way. Now, some, opposition like Shias and other people, critics will say that when we look at Ayesha's story further and further, we see how she is very concerned about her role and her importance. And one of the ways she could have gained some sort of influence or importance is by declaring up how her sexual purity. Since sexual purity is very prized in this culture, or you could say definitely 100% after the arrival of Islam, sexual purity is, the ultimate reward here that you will be getting. So she also plays up or wants to, use that to her advantage. So that's one of the reasons why she's constantly reminding how she was such a young child and how it was, she had no idea. She was taken with her dolls, and this 50-year-old man was completely taken and infatuated with her, which to today's time, and of course, any mature mind will see it as a sign of abuse. It's extremely disturbing and in no way, enhances any woman or child's worth. But this is how she sees her self-worth, in that she was very young and sexually pure. And what's interesting is that she will use those tactics to, in fact, demean other wives or other women who come into Muhammad's captivity or relationships. Her early years or her early memory are several incidents of her playing with dolls, her friends coming over playing with dolls, and, that just being the norm, and her husband essentially watching her and sometimes playing with her and her friends. I think this paints a picture because even today's Muslims or PR Muslims or, whatever you want to call them, are trying to paint you a picture of how close and how loving and caring he was. But any person in today's time will tell you what kind of behavior that is. A man and watching children play and then having sexual encounters with them. What kind of personality and what kind of care is that? Just because it was accepted doesn't mean it was okay. It's still very deviant, very disgusting, very disturbing. Even for a man who was claiming to be, a holy man, but to claim that he was also the perfect moral upstanding for all time, I think this is a big crux here. That's the question here. The other narrative they like to bring is that he married many women, and he married this older woman, the previous wife to Ayesha, Sauda, who was an older woman, motherly figure. And Ayesha essentially sees this woman as well as a motherly figure, which is very, I can't imagine what kind of environment that is. There's these two older 50-plus-year-old people in the house. She's a child in this house, and there's sexual encounters going on. That's like today's modern horror stories that, that's the kind of stories you don't want to hear. And if you ever see them on TikTok or somewhere, you're like, what kind of people are these people? What kind of monsters are these people who would allow this to happen? Yes, they're caring and feeding you, they're playing with your dolls, sometimes they play with you, but the fact that they engage in such sexual activities with you is an absolute, horrific, disturbing, and not a normal person. One of the stories I wanted to mention, which was an important scandal, which essentially was a scandal that happened in their life, happens when Ayesha, supposedly, if her age is what she says she is around 13 years old, and Muhammad is now raided Bani al-Mustaliq, a different tribe, and he has captured war, booty. They're coming back pretty happy with themselves, with a lot of bounty, booty, and like camels and women and slaves. And it's on this journey that she is essentially lost during, her bathroom trip and her necklace, and they forget about her. They are off. I think it's pretty traumatic if you think about it. This young child who accompanies this man on a pretty bloody mission. This is what she sees all basically growing up hearing. And now he's coming back. He's got his bounty, he's got his loot, he's got his, all these people are happy and pretty preoccupied about what they're going to do with all this, heading back. And, here's your love story. He forgot about her. They didn't even notice she was gone. She was missing, whatever the reason. I mean, it's pretty obvious why. This is the same trip that he has acquired a new female slave, Joaria. And you can imagine what he was preoccupied with. This is a trip where she is now scandalized because another person is bringing her back, and she's accompanying this guy on his camel. And now they're all slandering her, talking about her. And Muhammad, the divine contact, who knows everything, is actually also influenced. Let's be clear, he's influenced and also doubting. So this whole incident is pretty interesting because we can say that he doesn't always know what's going on, what happened. He could have simply said, but he wasn't too sure himself. If he just said like she was innocent, but he wasn't too sure. What if she wasn't and she turns out to be pregnant? So we can go to the conclusion that in this situation, Muhammad actually has no idea. He is asking his relative, Ali, and his adopted grandson, like all these other people, about what's going on with Ayesha, what's happening. Did you guys see anything? It's probably more likely he'll ask these people because they're also younger, they might know something. But they didn't see anything, they don't know anything. And the story where they're like, go ask her slave. The slave story is a little bit of an interesting fact because the slave acquired a couple years later, according to their, sources, the Hijra. It was 8-year Hijra where she was acquired, Barira. So for her to be asking this specific girl kind of conflicts with the story of the timeline. Anyway, the story here, she says, go ask the slave girl, and the slave girl basically says, like, I didn't hear anything either. She's kind of a young girl who like forgets and sleeps off and dozes off. These things, they don't really know what's going on, right? And she is absolutely heartbroken, traumatized to say the least. Here he is with his new Jovaria and other wives, whatnot, about her, and she's crying her, her heart, her eyes out at her parents' house. To say the least, it must have put a strain on his relationship with Abu Bakr. It definitely was putting a lot of pressure on him because, they had already come down with the verse of stoning for adultery. And that it's pretty scary for a 13-year-old to be going through this, traumatic. This 50-year-old husband who was, all this attention. I mean, for a child, this loving attention, she sees a very different side, a side that almost was ignoring and cold. That's how she described, like he was ignoring and cold towards her, distant. It is very threatening for in that situation, a young person to go through this. More or less, you can say that she realized that she had to develop had to basically live and survive this type of environment where she could easily been, discarded, replaced, even stoned. This incident does play a major role on her psyche, you could say. What ends up happening is after a whole month, like so many days, Muhammad even asks her, like, if you somehow did something, just confess. Like, I think that shows that he also kind of thought that that's what she did. It's like, if you confess, just we'll figure it out a way. God, I got my back with God. We'll somehow figure it a way. Whatever. It won't be so bad. Just confess and we can get over this. And she's completely angry, and she says, no, I'm not. I didn't do anything, and God's gonna say it. And lo and behold, God does say, okay, fine. She's like, the verses come down and she's innocent. I think this is in direct contrast because many years later you will see Ayesha says that, I find it amusing that Muhammad, your Lord, is very, quick and like really quickly wants to fulfill your desires, whatever issues and desires you have. Like he really wants to do it like right away. And I think you could say it was a reflection for this incident because he probably waited for a long time before he brought down these verses. You can almost see like some holes, she's poking some hole and there's some sort of questioning happening in her mind. But that's many years later. So we'll come back to the story here, back to her innocence. And now she's great, go back. Muhammad has, cleared you. And she's very angry. And she says, no, Muhammad didn't actually, God did. So we can see that there was a lot of, there's a lot of resentment here, that even Muhammad had these ideas or questions. Or it is moving forward that we see she is now not the quiet, not the believing, not this easily agreeable, girl anymore. She has ways that she has developed, which is typical of any harem or polygamy or any situation where a woman is going to be put in a position of competition. She's now in a sense always in a position of competition, and that is her means of survival. Her survival is being the wife, having the attention, adoration, and essentially affection of this man. She had to basically win his approval and always gain his attention. And you see her doing that by playing a lot of inside politics. A lot of people will claim that it was part of her personality, being jealous. And yes, you're right. It is it's sort of undeniable and you can't hide it. There's a lot of jealousy happening in her behavior, in her stories. Her jealousy is not only about the other wives, it extends to anyone who seems to be too close and has influence basically on Muhammad. She is very jealous of his daughter Fatima. They don't seem to have a very good equation. She's jealous of Ali, his nephew, in a way as close to him as a son basically, who was also his son-in-law because he married Fatima. So you can see that there's always this camp against those two. And you can say that that's exactly what the Shias saw, and that's how they, of course, exaggerated and put it up. But whatever, the facts are the facts. That is happening. There's a lot of inside politics. There's a lot of family politics happening. And you can try to figure out, what is the situation? Why is she always, jealous? Thing we can say here is there's few incidents that I would like to mention. One time Ali was sitting and talking to Muhammad in the evenings, and that was kind of his practice which house or whoever wife's house he was in. He had some time where he would talk to Ali as well. And she storms out and she says, why are you snatching this time away from me as well? He has only one night with me here and now you're coming and taking up that time. So you can see that her jealousy was basically Muhammad's affection or attention or time for Ali. And I think this plays out quite frequently. Anywhere Muhammad's attention diverts or goes to or gives time or, affection, she doesn't take it well. It's always a jealousy matter. And that is exactly how she does it with his other wives or eventual wives that came after. One of the most sad and disturbing incidents was when Hafsa tells her on about what happened with Maria, the slave girl, because she doesn't have a house. So he's having to spend night at Hafsa's house one day without, I guess, informing her. And she caught them. She was so angry, disturbed. Apparently this happened 2 times, even though he promised that he wouldn't do it again. And it was embarrassing and he's apologizing. And she was so angry because she did it. It was in her room, in her bed, as any wife would naturally feel really in my bedroom. And she also then ends up telling Ayesha about this whole situation. And now they are infuriated and extremely jealous because this woman is gaining a lot of affection and attention from their husband. And I think you can imagine this young woman, who has her whole life. And here she's having to grovel and obviously just play all these games and tactics. Her self-worth is completely tied to the fact that she has to gain his love and attention and affection. There's nothing else other than that in her life. As I was mentioning, the sad fact about how the Quran comes down condemning them. I feel that as a insult, humiliation. I mean, it's quite akin to abuse. The way Muhammad always demeans his wives, right? Either through the Quran or whatever, through incidents like this, is very demeaning. It's basically enshrined And it was always there in the verses of God, his God. Allah said all these things about his wives, and how everyone's going to read that and always know that and forever be discussed in that way. So that's kind of a repeat, really, if you think about it. That's kind of a repeat, because Muhammad, whoever he's angry with, or something so insulting, like previously it was his uncle Abu Lahab, so now him and his aunt, that him and his wife, so his uncle, his aunt, like that's enshrined forever. And now these incidents where his wives did something and he's really angry at them, and now again enshrined. You can see the repeat pattern here, that these things are just more to his emotional whims, really, what's going on here. Because later on they do make up, that's the sad, weird part. Later on their wives do make up, and now we have these verses, embarrassing them for the rest of their life and the rest of basically anybody else who reads that. Similar verse was when they, he boycotted all of them for a whole month again and just left them, where he's always discussing his first wife, Khadija, even though he knows like Ayesha is disturbed, probably his other wives too, but he always wants to praise her or like remind everybody of how great she was. I think that's kind of akin to sort of an emotional abuse. If you know your wife doesn't like you talking about your previous wife or relationships, constantly praising them, bringing them up, I don't think you would bring it up. But here we are exempt of all normal standards here, or normal expectations in a relationship, especially from the wives' end. We are sort of far removed from that. The only person's only needs and emotional needs or physical needs that are important are basically this man's. We don't really hear the other end, like how the other needs, the wives basically, or any one wife's needs is important. We don't see any of that happening here. They are shamed, shunned for asking for anything, for having their clear outburst, anger or jealousy. It's all demeaned, put down, embarrassed, basically. Aisha's constant behavior, is not sort of like, we can't really just attribute it to maybe her one specific personality. Like you can see there are a lot of actions that are contributing to this type of thinking, to this type of insecurity. We see her story one night where she says, sometimes whenever Muhammad was sleeping like at her house, even though in the middle of the night he would get up, right? And I was like, that's kind of disturbing. Like, why would you do that? Why do you need to get up in the middle of the night and go somewhere? Who normal husband does that? And that ignites so much insecurity, and we can figure out why. He gets up in the middle of the night, he goes out without telling his wife, secretly tiptoeing out of the house, and this woman, is losing her mind. She is always worried, always in this constant state of insecurity, or like, what is he doing? Where is he going? Why is he doing this? I've kind of contributed to this whole mental makeup, right? Like, why would you do that? And we see almost him rebuking her for when she's like had her stalking situation, comes back and tries to hide back. He's like, what were you doing? Were you the one following me? Oh my God, I thought you were the one following me. And, like I walked over here, probably changed his plan, like where he was going to go. He was probably going to go to some slave, some other woman or whatever he was going to do. And, we see her insecurities, like her always wondering, like, where is this man going? Why is he always putting me in this stress, in this situation? What does he do going on in the middle of the night? And he rebukes her pretty, like, which is also a sort of an incidence of physical, like, pushing or hitting, whatever. He's like asking, like, you think God and his messenger are gonna like, play with your rights or take away or something? And I'm like, you kind of already did. I don't know what you did give her in the end. There was no peace of mind, no emotional security, no that whole, it was just words like, oh, you're most important. I really do adore you. I love you. But to a child, who only grew up, that is kind of a very abusive relationship. She was just bonded to this thing in a very abusive way. And anytime she questioned or, her insecurities or her actions would show what, his behaviors were truly like, she was rebuked or criticized in a way, or not validated. They were not validated, her feelings. But in any way, if you think about his behaviors, what else would any other woman do? What else, or how any other normal woman behavior, how would she behave? That's exactly how she would behave. Interesting rebuke I like to bring up is a lot of the Muslim scholars and historians will say that actually Muhammad loved Khadija so much and respected her. That's why he never married another woman in her lifetime. And with that logic, we can say that he really never loved or respected any woman of his wives, any woman after that. Because clearly, despite the fact that he sees how hurt and pain and insecure, how much ruckus and like discontent it causes his wives, even the wife that he claims that he loves a lot and cares for, Ayesha, he doesn't stop. He keeps doing that specific exact behavior. So in that line, I guess he didn't love them or respect her that enough. You know, these were all that, basically it's my needs and my time, and, you're going to have to live with that. Now, I won't bore you with the stories of his inside harem politics, but it was an extreme ruckus. There was barely any peace. They were always one-upping each other. There are sad stories of other women who've been in abusive situations where they came from like being, raided, captured as a slave. And towards those women who had any, who Muhammad might have showed any attention or signs of leaning or affection, that she made sure that she would always remain, on top by demeaning them, by calling daughter of Jews, the Copts, or slaves, or how could you sleep with a man who just murdered your husband, your father, which broke off one or two of his marriages, refusing to be cooperative, decent, or, sharing anything with them. So yes, these incidents definitely happened. You can imagine what kind of extreme harsh harem politics was playing out in this, in this masjid or mosque or Muhammad's house. What I like was how in my earlier videos I mentioned how later on, Ayesha now has this scholar Ayesha title, but like throughout her whole life, there was nothing scholarly or decent or, exemplary. All she did was cause fights, was part of scandals. And I think in an attempt to gain and continue her influence, she did talk up a lot about her importance, definitely, after his death. She wanted to remind everyone of her position, her importance, and she enjoyed. That is her, obviously that's her survival. She never had children, and I think the lack of children is an important point to bring up, because at one point when she was again, fed up of hearing Khadija, he's like, why do you keep bringing her name? Like, am I not better? Didn't God give you something better and younger? And Muhammad turns around, demeans her again. Don't you dare, blah, blah, blah. And, she's the only woman who I have children with. I think that's kind of a crude and a mean insult to give to your wife. And imagine her seeing that, because she, as a young woman, always was barren, never had children. But imagine seeing your 50-year-old husband going around with other young women, philandering, having his way. And in one point, actually able to father another child. Of course, this has caused a lot of pain, jealousy, and, extreme anger, frustration, resentment in this woman. The onus of virtue actually lies upon the women, as this is very interesting, because, isn't he the one who claims to be a prophet? Isn't he the one who needs to be pure? Isn't he the one who needs to remain chaste? But here, we don't see any of that. We see that reversed. Basically, his wives, they have to play the chaste role after even he dies. They're not allowed to remarry. They have to remain, that situation. I think it plays back to the whole point where, the Arab cultures, when they called someone their mother, that was a big deal. They, even in speaking, they couldn't call someone mother. So here Muhammad, conveniently says, like, these are all your moms, these are all your mothers. So, basically can't marry them. And for a young girl who's widowed at what we would consider to be age 18, that's a long and lonely life, which was filled with a lot of, insecurity, jealousy, pain, polygamy, always, having other women, whether wives or slaves, taking the attention of her husband. Ayesha always, this culture really prized being a mother. They even gave you a special title if you had a child, that would be like, so-and-so. And she never really gets to have that title, which she says, like, all your other wives actually do have, children, either they had previous or they have something. Why can't I have it? Like, I would like to have it. I think she's maybe even suggesting that, like, why isn't God, giving her children? Like, ask, like, I want to be the mother of the next heir, as you would have it. but that never happens. And you can see this was always going to be a lifelong resentment for her, or a void, as I would have it, that she never really got to have that status. It's a very important status that she didn't have. And in order to compensate for that, she did play up a lot of her other, areas. I would even say borderline indecent exposure of private matters, trying to solidify how important and, like Muhammad was with her. She was so important. He was, she was so amazing. One of the weirdest incidents was when she tells Fatima, his daughter, and makes fun of her mother, basically, that, Khadija was an old woman who had several husbands, basically, when Muhammad married her, but she herself was a virgin. And that's her prized virtue and her real worth that she has, that she was a virgin, and that's why therefore she is better. So you can see the many ways she constantly plays up that one point, that specific point, even during his life and after his death. The reason they like to call her Scholar Ayesha is because she basically kept running her mouth about how amazing and all her stories and how close she was. So, Scholar Ayesha, even though she never really learned to read or write, never had any other kind of education, even though she was deep neck in scandals, everywhere, scandals happening, so much fighting, so much inside, family inside politics, she wanted to enjoy that whole virtuous look. And I think that was another PR attempt of hers as well. One of the weirdest thing I thought that, when historians would look at Muhammad and Ayesha, was that Muhammad and Ayesha enjoyed an intellectual, relationship. They had a strong intellectual relationship. And I would like to point out that what kind of relationship can happen between a 50-year-old man and a child? What does that say about the man himself? And the fact of the whole concept of grooming. And this child adored him, really. And I think that's what he enjoyed. She had sort of a blind belief in adoring eyes, unquestioning. And a lot of incidents that do happen have her, in that situation. At one point when she, again, being in her childish ways or immature, irresponsible, stage, she did forget to tie up a slave or keep watch over him because her friends came over, and he runs away. And Muhammad tells her, in anger, oh, may her hands be cut. And he storms off. And when he comes back, he finds her staring at her hands and looking, and he's like, what are you doing? What's going on? And he says, and she replies to him, I was wondering when my hands were going to fall off, what's going to happen? And he says to her, that was just a figure of speech, that didn't happen. This, I think, goes on to show how much a child was, steeped in blind belief and whatever she was told. She believed what was said. And later on in her years, maybe she kind of had that, hey, I can question, other people question, maybe I can sort of bargain, I can negotiate, I can have influence. And in order to maintain that position or that, sort of, favor, she does play a lot of politics. So I'm going to end this part of analysis here. I might make a part 2 for the rest of her life as well, post Muhammad. If you guys enjoyed this video, I'd like to hear comments, questions. Please do post them in the comments section below. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you. Bye.